Hi, I'm Bruce Carse and here for SoundWorks Collection. Tonight we're joined by the sound team for Joel and Ethan Coen's new film, True Grit. Joining me tonight are supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer, Skip Lievsay, re-recording mixer, Greg Orloff, and dialogue ADR editor, Byron Wilson. Thanks for sitting down and talking to us about the new film, you guys. Now, Skip, I want to start with you because you've been with Joel and Ethan since the very beginning.
All 14 movies, is it? Since Blood Simple? I think it's 14.
Yeah. And how did that first one happen? How did you, I mean, did you know them before Blood Simple, or did you meet in the process, or?
I was introduced to him by the producer of that film, Mark Silverman, who I knew from other projects working in New York City. And they were looking for someone to exploit. And they had very little money, and I was perfect for them. I was ready to be exploited. And they paid me a sad salary for a few months until they ran out of money. And then they started giving me an IOU each week in my paycheck, my pay envelope. And when we got to the final mix of the movie, I made them ask me every question for my approval because I actually owned a good chunk of the movie at that time, which they paid me back. They made good on their IOU. Well, I said I wouldn't do the next one unless they did.
And you've been on every single one since.
Yes.
Who else from the Coen brothers crew has been around that long?
Peter Kurland, our location mixer on this movie and all of the other movies after, I believe, Miller's Crossing. Okay. But he was utility and boom on the first two movies. So he has been around
since the very beginning.
Yep.
So you and Peter, and I know that Mary Zoffrey's costume designer has been around for a while, not since the very beginning. Jess Goncher, the production designer, has been there the last number of films, and certainly Roger Deakins.
Right.
But Carter Burwell, you introduced Carter to Joel and Ethan, didn't you, way back in the day?
I did.
Was that during Blood Simple?
It was for Blood Simple. When we got to that point, we were looking for music and trying to figure out what to do, and they basically said, they're out-of-towners. They're from Minnesota, so they didn't know what to do next, who to ask. So there was a music supervisor who we were working with who did a very good job. His name was Murray.
just the one.
Just Murray.
like Cher or Madonna.
We called
just
him
Murray.
Yeah, we called him Murray. The Murr.
Wasn't the dog in that Paul Reiser film called Murray?
Murray. Yeah. Well, we started with looking around to people who we knew, and I knew Carter from the music scene in New York, which I was sort of vaguely involved with. And we had some friends who we both worked with, Carter and I, who we worked with musically. And so I introduced them, and they really liked him, and they really got on, and it seemed like a good idea. But Carter was working on a project, a digital image project, which was taking him to Japan, and he said, I would love to do the movie, but in fact, I think he said, I think I would like to do the movie, but I'm going to Japan. I won't be here. I can't do it. So Joel and Ethan said, okay. So we talked to some other people, and another guy was hired, and he got pretty far along, and everything was going okay, and he kind of erased some key parts of the score. So Joel and Ethan kind of freaked out and begged Carter to come in and maybe go to Japan some other time.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Oh. Well, the thing that I noticed, particularly, you guys worked on No Country for Old Men, and that nomination, when that film got the accolades that it did, it was wonderful, because up until then, it was rare to find a more minimalistic or a quieter or I don't want to say smaller, because it's not smaller, but a quieter film, perhaps, get that kind of notice. Because we've seen year after year the animated films, the big action films, but just because something's loud, just because something has a ton of effects, doesn't mean it's more complex or more challenging. So I was thrilled when No Country for Old Men happened, and the great thing about True Grit is that, to me, this is a classic Western, but it's not classic at all. it doesn't have any of those, those cliches. Like there's nobody busting through the barroom doors. There's no fist fight where the guy ends up in the horse trough outside. What do you guys do to keep things original and unique from a sound perspective? And maybe the way to get to that answer, maybe we can talk about how integrated is sound in the script that Joel and Ethan give you guys. Do they make a lot of sound notes inside that original script?
They do. They're very precise with their storytelling, and sound is an integral part, and music and the way it's shot. Those are all integrated in their concept, and so that's all reflected in the script, and it's all there. When you read the script, the scripts are wonderful to read because they're very they're graphic. They tell just what's going to happen.
I think that's a great word for it too, because we often hear about filmmakers. Oh, it's a very visual script, but when you're talking about sound, graphic is a word that
it lets the sound in a little bit.
Yeah,
graphic.
Yeah.
But they're precise in our dealings as well. We know where we're going because of their precision, the way they make their films. And their instructions to us are very precise.
Well, let's talk about those instructions, because you've worked with them for so long that I know you've developed a shorthand, and I know they're not guys who like to do a lot of talking about. They trust you.
True.
They trust you to do your job, to do what you're really good at. So early on, what are the earliest discussions like between you and Joel and Ethan?
Well, it's a little bit like, I've never been in a pitch meeting, but it seems a little bit like a pitch where we talk about the movies, and rather than using pitch terms like a dramedy, comedy sort of terms, we use the movies that we've done. So
the movies that you've actually worked on together, not other people's movies.
Yeah, and other references, the other films that we refer to, films we've seen and admire. That's the sort of language, like in Blood Simple when we did that, we want to do that here. Or this is going to be, we actually don't talk very much, but we do talk about it in those terms. Like we want to have something here like we did last time in that movie. And so it helps us, it's that shorthand kind of a thing where we can refer to our previous work. And the nice thing about it is that we know that succeeded on that film when we're referring to it in that way. The good thing that we did last time, let's do that again,
Not the bad thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to do the bad.
Now, was the original True Grit movie with John Wayne ever referenced?
Well, I liked the movie, and we all talked about it. And I'm not sure. Joel and Ethan claim that they haven't watched it
That's what they claim.
a while.
That's what they said. That
I know that at one point they said that there was something like maybe the swim across scene where they thought, maybe we should look at it and see what they did. And then I think they decided not to do that either. But I think they, it's really about the book.
Yeah. So did you go when they first called you up and said, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to do True Grit"? Do you read the script that they sent you and then go read the book, or?
No, I read the book first.
Oh, you read the book first.
I knew that that's what they were going to reference. And they're terrible at sending me scripts, so I never get the scripts until they get the scripts before I do. So I always try to go to the source, and in this case it was the book, which I really liked the book. And I know the movie I'd seen as a kid, I'm a big Western fan, and I know that that's not what they were going to try to do. So it's sort of pointless to look at the movie, actually, the John Wayne movie, because it's not very much like the book either. So it's kind of misleading, actually.
I bet it's exciting for you guys to work on a Western. It's the film genre that we all grew up on.
Yeah.
When you heard that Joel and Ethan were going to do a Western, Greg, what was your immediate reaction?
What's interesting to me is that since I've known Skip, and even before we were working on Coen Brothers movies together, Skip had always wanted them, kind of gently, I don't know, nudging them, but had always wanted them to make a Western. So I've known this for 20 years. That Skip
you knew before Joel and Ethan knew it, yeah.
Possibly, that eventually they would, only because Skip wanted them to.
Yeah.
So I knew it would happen. I do love the genre from a sonic standpoint. They're great to do. I mean, you have earth and wood and wind and just everything natural and organic that you would ever want in a soundtrack. So from our standpoint, I mean, they're great. They're great to do.
And Byron, from a dialogue standpoint, I mean, some of the most iconic lines that we have in movie history come from westerns.
Come from westerns. But when you hear they're doing a western, you think, okay, a lot of horses, a lot of radio mics, a lot of words. So it was going to be a challenge.
And a lot of the dialogue's taken right out of the book, isn't it?
Right out of the book. Yeah, right out of the book. One of all the narration at the end, it's all out of the book. It's all right out of the book.
It's interesting that you bring up narration. You've worked, Skip, you've worked with a number of directors who use narration. There's always been this talk out there that some filmmakers use narration as a crutch. But it's very different in this movie. This is not narration that's used to, expose a lot of information. We really get inside of Maddie's thought process. We get to know her by what she says.
It's also interesting that I think, except the old Maddie narration, it's all letters. It's all letters being read.
Oh, that's until you said that, I hadn't really noticed that.
Yeah, the lawyer, even Rooster's note to Maddie is a letter to her.
Well, I'm a big fan of narration myself. I've worked on a lot of narration movies, like Goodfellas, for instance. And I love the way narration frees the filmmaker to be much less literal. And it becomes more of a cinematic experience because you can pretty much, it works both ways because you can have any image really being shown in the narration. And you can talk about things in narration that you cannot do in dialogue between characters. You can talk about what I thought, what you thought, what I was thinking, how I felt, things like that, which you just can't do in dialogue. It's just really.
And usually it's relegated to a single narrator. But you've worked on a number of films that have multiple narrators. What kind of challenge does that create?
Well, there is kind of a boundary to it, which I like to kind of explore, and I've done them many times. Where I take the voiceover, and like this movie, where the voiceover is played from left, center, right speakers, not just from the center. And most of the time, we play the dialogue from the center's channel only. And I like that kind of separation that it creates another space for the voiceover to be in, which is actually where it's coming from.
Now, when you record the narration, is it recorded in a different environment, or are you doing it, on an ADR stage, or are you treating that recording differently because it's going to be used as narration?
Well, it's kind of a mix and match. Like, for instance, Tommy Lee Jones' voiceover at the beginning of No Country was recorded in his trailer on the set, and it was done that way so they would have something. It was done like a wild line, where basically when you're filming and during production, Peter, the location mixer, is trying to capture a recording for everything that's in the script, talking, sound effects, and everything else. So that's written there, the voiceover is written there, so he wants to record that so they'll be able to cut with it. So while they were all there on location, they went and set up in Tommy's trailer, and Peter's very good about quieting the room and putting up sound blankets and stuff, as you do as a location mixer, so he could have a fairly clean recording. And so they shot that with Tommy so that they would have something to cut with, and that's what ended up in the movie. And that's not uncommon. Whereas many times we'll do voiceover and we'll do it as part of the ADR process. A lot of times what happens is the voiceover is rewritten. So it has to be re-recorded, several times quite often. Like I did The Last Temptation of Christ. We did the voiceover 4 times with Willem. Wow. And there's, 50 pages of voiceover for that movie. I won't tell you how many times we recorded voiceover for The New World. It was like big stack of pages for the actors to do.
Well, so we've got 3 narrators in True Grit, right? We've got the young Maddie, the old Maddie, and the lawyer.
Right.
Is that?
And Jeff reads his note.
That's right. Jeff. Okay.
Jeff's note, I think, was a wild line. Was done wild on the set. His note to Maddie, and I think, and all the others were ADR on an ADR
Just out
stage.
of curiosity, who's the actor who did the lawyer?
J.K. Simmons.
It was, okay. He has a very distinctive voice, and I was
does.
pretty sure that's who it was. But, you know, we're talking about the narration, and I'd like for you guys to talk a little bit about the bookends to the film, because they're very effective. We often are used to visual bookends in a film, or we go back to a particular scene or moment between characters. But there's some very distinctive sonic bookends in this film. Can you guys talk about those? You know?
Well, the thing about the voiceover is that it kind of automatically creates a open and close. And it also nicely creates a sort of closure, because it starts the story off by saying, here's my story, and it ends the movie off by saying, and that's the way it happened, basically. And I think that audiences like to have that closure. You know, it's like a crime. You know, they like to know who did it and why.
And there's even the closure of Rooster's character. I mean, we go from Maddie looking over her father's coffin being sent back to Yale County, and then we see the end of Rooster's life, going back to be buried on Maddie's land.
Well, in the John Wayne movie, which we didn't reference in this case, but it is interesting to point out that they omitted that, and they jumped into a middle ground and created a new scene which wasn't in the book, so that John Wayne wouldn't have to die, so they could have the sequels that they did.
Yes.
And but the new scene was him visiting Maddie at the family graveyard, the gravesite, which is sort of like saying he's going to die in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
But that was, I was struck when I read the book, and I knew that's the way that had been made up for the John Wayne film.
Well, I love the opening of the film. We hear the narration. Number one, we see Proverbs come up.
People did not give it credence that a young girl could leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood, but it did happen. I was just 14 years of age when a coward by the name of Tom Chaney shot my father down and robbed him of his life and his horse and 2 California gold pieces that he carried in his trouser band. Chaney was a hired man, and Papa had taken him up to Fort Smith to help lead back a string of Mustang ponies he'd bought. In town, Chaney had fallen to drink and cards and lost all his money. He got it into his head he was being cheated and went back to the boarding house for his Henry rifle. When Papa tried to intervene, Chaney shot him. Chaney fled. He could have walked his horse, for not a soul in that city could be bothered to give chase. No doubt Chaney fancied himself scot-free. But he was wrong. You must pay for everything in this world one way and another. There is nothing free except the grace of God.
Now, during your process, do you guys, are you using recordings of the hymns prior to getting any kind of musical sketches from Carter that are based on the hymns? What are you using to kind of, do you guys do temps, so to speak, in your process with Joel and Ethan, or do you work a little bit differently?
We do temps, and we do very elaborate temps, and we spend weeks on preparing for screenings. It's a little different in that we don't usually do marketing screenings during the process. It's more of a friends and family sort of an environment. And then there are sort of procedural screenings where we show producers and studio executives the progress for I don't know why we do that.
For various reasons.
I mean, there are a lot of reasons to have those screenings.
So when you're
But the
you're
point is
working,
we don't have that.
Yeah, and going back to Carter, at what point do you start working with any bit of the music, whether it's sketches that Carter's provided, whether it's pre-recorded, the hymns that some of the score was based on?
Basically, Carter and his team give us music, which are usually temp cues from other films, and sometimes his and sometimes other artists' cues. And we put them in the film, which basically is used to inform the filmmakers about rhythm and pace, and it also helps them understand the music for the film. So, like on this movie, we put in naturally Aaron Copland and Elmer Bernstein and Western cues, and we temp those in, we mix those in, and some of them stood for a while, like during the swim across. That was an obvious, Aaron Copland moment, and the music that's in the movie reflects that. But the hymn idea came to Joel and Ethan and Carter during that process. So we didn't hear the hymn concept until much later. In fact, I don't think we ever got that until we got to the final mix, right?
Right.
Well, I'm kind of curious at how you guys kind of build the soundtrack for the film. Some filmmakers, they're not as concerned with Foley in the early attempts,
Or anytime.
or anytime. Sometimes, there are certain effects that filmmakers want to hear. I've heard that Joel and Ethan are very concerned about certain aspects of the soundtrack, really right from the very beginning. Can you talk about what they're looking to hear on even the earliest of screenings?
Well, this particular film was a bit of a challenge because there was weather issues, and we knew that there would be issues with Rooster's accent in terms of intelligibility. So from the very beginning, we prepared. We worked along with them. So when they were cutting, they don't cut while they're shooting. They wait until they're finished, and then they start cutting it. And we worked right behind them, and they cut in a linear, from beginning to end of the movie. And as they got through the scenes, they would give us the material and we'd start working on it. And Byron and I started working from day one, cutting and mixing in preparation for a very early screening, because we had to deal with the issue of
Well, you had some serious dialogue issues.
Yeah,
I mean,
dialogue
you have a main character who is drunk through most of the movie, and probably has some speech issues even before the 80 proof or 100 proof is added. You've got another lead character who's bit half his tongue off. You've got a girl who enunciates everything and has this expansive vocabulary. And you've got another character who's kind of
Mentally challenged.
I think Josh actually talks about his character of Cheney as he's not just the dimmest bulb, he's the bulb without a filament. So this must have been a nightmare, the dialogue.
Yeah, the first two scenes that we really were asked to work on was what we call the wind scene, which is when Maddie wakes up in the morning, and the scene where that Rooster and LaBeef have their argument, and LaBeef rides off. The wind was so terrible that day. That was one of the first scenes we cut to see how much looping we were going to have to do and everything.
Where's Mr. LaBeef?
Down by the creek performing as necessary.
Well, Marshal Cogburn, I welcome the chance for a private parley. I gather that you and Mr. LaBeef have come to some sort of agreement. And as your employer, I believe I have the right to know the particulars.
The particulars is that we bring Cheney down to the magistrate in San Saba, Texas, where they have a considerable reward on offer, which we split.
I did not want him brought to Texas to have a Texas punishment administered for a Texas crime. That was not our agreement.
What you want is to have him caught and punished.
I want him to know that he's being punished for killing my father.
Well, you can let him know that. You can tell him to his face. You can spit on him, make him eat sand out of the road. I will hold him down.
That scene, and then the scene behind in Rooster's room in the back of the grocery store where she comes in and wakes him up, and they make their deal, for the $50 to go that they'll go together. So those two scenes were cut first. A lot of that was wild lines recorded on the set, in the store scene, and they just wanted to see how much of those scenes were salvageable. We ended up looping all of the wind scene except probably about the first 6 Jeff Bridges lines, our production. All of Maddie is looped. All of LaBeef is looped.
And that's all as a result of the wind, the weather.
Of the wind. And the back room scene is probably about, I would say, at least 60% rooster looped for intelligibility issues, and maybe just 2 Maddie lines. But the whole, just the sequence where he walks around, walks all across the room, and runs into the ducks and all that.
That's a great scene. I imagine there's a lot of Foley in that scene as well, isn't there, Greg?
Yeah, it's a kind of a blend of Foley and production, and it's knowing when to, how to blend them both. There's a lot of production.
A blender.
And yeah, that's what I'm a blender. I bring sounds together.
Yeah, we would build like, just go through and find all the production movement we could find, especially on the big walk around, just so it makes it, so it doesn't, the ADR isn't just so bare, but it's just movement and clanks and to get him around the room and up off the cot and back on the cot, so it all sounds smooth.
Now, the schedule on this, was it pretty tight in terms of the post schedule?
It was. We usually start working for them at around Christmas and then finish at around this time of the year, January or February. And but they wanted to make the Christmas release date, so we had to basically compress our schedule. The picture editing schedule was what was compressed by more than half. So they had half as much time, basically.
What's it like for you to work with directors who also edit their picture? Because I mean, most of the directors that you work with have a separate picture editor. Mm-hmm. What does that allow you more creativity? Does it offer you to bring a different perspective to the shoot? What?
It's in a lot of ways it's more direct because they're all the same person basically. Joel and Ethan really are the same person in terms of their unified view of the approach to the work, and it is nice to be able to have sort of a single general at the head of the column. And I always liked having very direct orders, even if I don't agree with them. I'd rather have to deal.
Because there's no extra layer of interpretation, no middleman, middle person between you.
And that's sometimes, because of the nature of the work, the editor becomes part of that role, takes that role. And it's usually for a very good reason. Usually the director's occupied with some other part of the process. And so we end up spending time with an editor. And sometimes we go down the editor's path, which is not necessarily the director's path, and that can be troubling and upsetting for everyone. So,
yeah.
But
conversely, I mean, sometimes the editor knows exactly what the directors want, is able to take you on the path that you need to be taken on.
Now, is there kind of a process or a level of priority typically on a picture with Joel and Ethan of what kind of elements they want in the temps and things so that they can kind of start to shape the performances in the picture editing? I mean, do you go with the effects first? Do you go with the dialogue, try to get the dialogue and ADR under control? Where do you guys start, and was True Grit any different than you typically work with them?
Well, we basically we go from the get-go like we're doing the final mix. We prepare as quickly as we can, and usually I'm talking weeks, to prepare all the material that's necessary for the movie. And we basically, from the very beginning, start processing the film as if it's the final mix, basically. And one of the reasons why that's crucial, and this is part of their request to us as a way of working, is nowadays when Peter Kurland records the movie on location, he's recording multiple microphones on every take. So basically, essentially for every setup, the actors will have a wireless microphone, and then there'll be a boom in the coverage as well. And when for Daly's purposes, that's mixed down to a single recording. And it's part of what Peter does on location is he prepares a mix track for use for dailies and specifically for them to edit the picture with. But oftentimes what you have is several microphones being recorded together into one sometimes loud recording, which is not actually, doesn't tell the whole story about what's in the master recordings. So one of the things that Byron and I do at the very beginning is we sort out and we go back for every line. We find the best, cleanest recording, which oftentimes by itself is actually quite low-level noise. You know, it's a very good recording. But because other microphones are added to the mix, it sounds like there's a lot of wind or a lot of traffic or et cetera. And so we're able to go into, that's one of our early charges, is to go into the masters and try to find out what of these seemingly very noisy takes can be salvaged by going back to the individual recordings.
And isolate those tracks so you know what performances that you have to work with.
And we
So-
cut everything as if there is no ADR. And you cut the whole movie, not anticipating there's going to be ADR, so stuff you don't cut. You cut the whole movie and you try to fix everything. You know, you try to find alternate takes and the best microphone. Maybe it's mixing two microphones together, but you cut the whole movie as if there is no ADR.
But I would imagine that you probably do you've worked on all these films. I would imagine the volume of ADR is pretty low on most of their films. This one, was this one like up near the top? Because I mean, you had 4 different very distinct voices and accents. Can you talk a little bit about the volume of ADR, or the quantity of ADR that you had to do on this picture, Byron?
Yeah, this is my 4th Coen Brothers movie, and this one has by far more than all 4 put together. ADR. I mean, it was just a lot of words, and the intelligibility of Rooster was an issue. I mean, it was a concern and a care of the filmmakers. And just from being so much of it shot outdoors, and just so many words in the movie, so much talking, and the performance was so important to the directors, and just the way that words were phrased. There's no contractions in the movie, and some things were looped to take the contractions out. And
So you guys had to play contraction police a little bit.
yeah, a little bit. I mean, just they kind of had developed a unique way of speaking. They kind of came up with a dialect for the movie, and a lot of Rooster was looped for intelligibility concerns. And
Well, clearly in the Coen Brothers movies, the language is always very important. So we know that you're working on the dialogue in the ATR as quickly as possible from the very beginning. At what point are you adding in effects and Foley and backgrounds? How early do Joel and Ethan want to feel all those things together?
Early.
Right from the beginning. The third man who walks beside us isn't here, Craig Berkey, who he accepts that challenge from day one. When we start, he starts. And he starts making sound effects and atmospheres for the movie in the same way that Byron and I are doing dialogue in ADR from the beginning. So, and it's not only helps us because, like, what happens is, like, let's say, for instance, we find a scene where we have some very good radio mic recordings. Radio mic recordings don't usually capture very much else. It's mostly the voice only. So when we start to move towards radio recordings, we need to have everything else filled in. Otherwise, it's very naked. And as much as they want to know that the voice is good, they also want to have a presentable piece for their screenings. So Craig starts from the very beginning. He basically makes sound effects for the entire movie from the very beginning, from the earliest cuts, so that we can, as we're going, we can prepare and make a screening track so the movie can be screened by the filmmakers or anyone else who needs to see the movie as we're going.
So obviously wind is something that they're going to start adding, and backgrounds is something on this movie is something they're going to start wanting to hear as soon as possible on these early ones. And I would imagine horses and gunshots.
Yep. Well, it works both ways because it helps them, it informs them and helps them to do their cut. But it also, we present, basically, we're saying this is what we think the movie should sound like. And a lot of our discussion about having talks with them about guidance and direction really takes that form. Like, we make the movie and we present it to them, and then they give us feedback. So for the first usually 4 to 6 weeks, we're basically making a presentation to them. And then
do they watch it, or do you guys have spotting sessions where you're all sitting in the room with them?
well, in this one, we watched it right at the very end of their first cut. We basically watched the temp that we had been making. And then we had our spotting sessions based on that. Which is not it didn't exactly work that way. I mean, basically, when everything that was important to the movie, all the horses and gunshots and ADR and Foley and things where whatever they shot on location was too noisy or etc., they wanted to have that to work on their cut. And so we would give them little parts, little pieces, little scenes, and they'd put that into their editing system. And they gave us feedback on the gunshots and horses and things as they were going.
Well, speaking of horses, nice segue there. Speaking of horses, one of my favorite scenes in the film is when Maddie and Blackie cross the river.
Hey! Go, little Blackie. Come on.
That is quite a horse.
Can you kind of take us into how you guys created that sonically? Because it's really a pretty incredible scene.
Well, that is a really nice scene, and it's a very Western-ish kind of a scene, which is one of the things that's so charming about it. Is it's like there's scenes like that in many of the great westerns of American film.
You know, the raging river and trying to
Get across, and we knew that it also. I mean, it was a great moment for music, and so we had this, the challenge of coming up with something that could play with a big music cue, as we suspected would be there. And I was there when they filmed that sequence, and so I had a very good idea of what it really sounded like. And so we decided that we would find a way to make a horse swim so we could record that. And we wanted to know, we didn't really know what that would sound like, but we wanted to find out, and we thought, of course, that would be some glorious sound. And so Joel Doherty and I went about trying to find a way to get a horse to jump into something, a lake, a pond, or something. And Joel found that hydrotherapy is a big deal in this part of the country because there are a lot of horses, there are a lot of race horses, and when they get injured, in order for them to recuperate, they have to have a low-impact strengthening of their legs when they injure their legs. So after the surgery, they have this hydrotherapy where basically they swim the horses in pools.
And so were there things when you were on location, when they were actually filming it, were there things that you learned about the behavior of the horses and even the actors in that scene that you knew you had to recreate?
Well, it's more that, like, basically what happened is when they swam, they had 4 horses that were Blackie, and they were just, you know, sort of stand-ins for each other. Whenever one horse tired, they brought another. And to do that swim across is, you know, I don't know if it's actually dangerous for the animal, but it's not something that they're called on to do very much. So they had one of the reasons why they had 4 horses was in case some of the horses said, I don't want to swim across. So when the double got on the horse and rode down to the water, the first horse jumped right in and swam right across, no problem. The second horse ran up to the river's edge and turned around and said no. So everyone was very aware of that, and the one thing that they said is no sound, no booms that might spook them.
Oh, okay.
No wires. We don't want to have anything that isn't necessary. And we know one thing that they always say is, oh, they can do that later. They'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect example. And they said no sound, no wires, no nothing. So there was no sound. Actually, they did stand out of the shot and held microphones. So we have sort of guide tracks of what happened. But I mean, I know what happens. We all know what that should sound like. We've seen it done. So, we thought that there might be something sort of special about recording that event. So, we found a hydrotherapy pool up in Los Olivos, and we went up and shot Jay Wilkinson and Joel and I. Jay Wilkinson was one of the effects editors. We shot them swimming these horses, and it was kind of glorious because it was a big pool. It's about 50 feet in diameter, and it's about 15 or 20 feet deep. And there's a walk-in ramp at one side, and they basically walk the horses into the pool, and they just swim. They look like dogs.
Are they kind of like dog paddle?
Yeah. But the thing about the horses that you find out is, and this I found out on location, was that when the horse goes in the water, their entire body goes quite deep, like 2 feet under the water. And the horse's neck is sticking up out of the water. And that's it, pretty much. And the horses really spends all their effort keeping their nose out of the water so they can keep breathing. And what's happening, so it's kind of a 2-part. What's happening above the water is the horse trying to not drown. And what's happening below the water is this lovely kind of dog paddling, you know. So the rider, when you go in, you're meant to let go, because you don't ride the horse when it's in the water. So basically,
do
you
you get
just
off
let
the
go.
horse?
Yeah, you just let go and hold on to the horn. So of the saddle,
So you're kind of drifting
you just kind
behind.
of swimming along, holding on to the saddle. So so we go to Los Olivos and we lead the horse into the water, and that doesn't make any sound at all. The only sound is the horse will blow out of its nose to make sure that the breathing passage is clear, so it snorts.
And in the film, it's clearly a struggle for the horse, because we hear that repeatedly, as if the horse really is struggling for its last breath.
It's really
almost,
just
yeah.
blowing. It's blowing through its nose to make sure that no water goes up its nose, and that's what the sound that we used.
Yeah, the original production track was just, it sounded like a loop, was just a snort, constant snort. It sounded like you were taking the same piece and just...
And just the sound of the river itself, was that from a library, or did you guys record that?
Well, I'm not sure where Craig got that from, but it was probably a recording for either for this film or for some recent project.
Yeah.
It may have been from a library as well.
Another scene that's a particular favorite, I think, of everyone's is the night shootout at the cabin.
Him and the woolly chaps is lucky Ned.
think it really starts from Roger's image there, which is that kind of cold blue light. You know, it sort of really feels on the one hand, it feels harsh, you know, and stark, but it's also very shadowy and there are a lot of places to hide. And so I think the idea from the beginning was for everything to be quite subtle, and all the speaking, all the way until the guns start going, is all very kind of quiet and hushed and sneaking around, a sort of sneaky kind of movie scene. And
Yeah, and we see Maddie up on the roof.
sneaking.
Yeah.
And then the boys discover who's in there, what's going on. They start yelling at each other, and then the shooting starts. And that's kind of a wonderful, kind of a beautiful and effective gimmick that we use, where we make it quiet for a while, and everyone kind of leans forward a little bit to hear what's happening. And then you blast them back into their seats with some gunshots. But there was one part of it which we did on the stage here, on this stage, when we were doing it. We had Maddie up on top, and you know, we wanted to hear her footsteps, but we wanted to pitch it in a way that it was conceivable that we could hear it from above, but they wouldn't hear, the men inside the cabin wouldn't have heard her. So Greg had a nice handful of Foley to walk her up there. But then at a certain point, somebody figures out from inside what's going on, and it's quiet, and then there's the first gunshot, is the gunshot that goes up from below up through the roof. So that was going along okay, but we didn't make that connection until we all got here. And I said, well, let's make it so that one of the things she steps on has a big wooden creak. So everything gets quiet for a minute. They hear the wooden creak, and then they realize someone's on the roof, and that's when they shoot through the roof. Mm-hmm. So we made that while we were here, and nobody got it.
So you kind of
Until
added that
moment.
in. It wasn't apparent, obviously, in the.
None of us
Always
got
evolving.
It. Yeah,
It's always evolving.
it takes a while. That's why we call it the final mix.
That's right. That's right. I tried to call it that.
Who's out there?
We're looking for shelter.
No room for you here. Right on.
What was in there?
Right on. They done fucked it up.
I'm a federal officer.
Do you guys have a particular favorite moment? Do each of you have a favorite moment in the film, sound-wise, that might surprise us?
Well, my favorite scene was always the Moon and Quincy scene, in the cabin with the two outlaws. I thought it was very, very poignant and sad. You know, the man dying at the end. My favorite line of the movie was cut out. Just a funny little short scene line. I don't know.
Well, you got to tell us what the line is.
The line is its fingers. Can I tell them the scene that was cut out, or is that a no-no?
The fingers?
Yeah.
That's still in there, isn't it?
No.
No.
You mean where he
You gotta
cuts the
tell them.
fingers off
Cuts
of the
the
guy with the
fingers off.
butcher, with
Hey,
the cleaver?
Okay. Well, there was a very short scene after the Moon and Quincy scene when the man dies on the fingers cut off, and there was a short scene between the interior of the cabin and then when they were up on the ridge waiting for the men to come. It was where they were cleaning up the cabin, and Rooster saying, okay, I put the bodies out back and we put the horses and to hide everything for the guys to come. and for Ned Pepper's gang to come. And at the very end of the scene, he throws something, and Maddie asks him, "What was that?" And he says, "Fingers." Threw the guy's fingers in the bushes. But yeah, I've always liked "I do not know this man," because that was a loop line, and we did so many different takes of that. And yeah, just ADR, little ADR things, where I know that one little piece of production amongst a lot of ADR.
I noticed that you guys use you use kind of different oral qualities for different characters. And I know that you guys have done that in past movies. Maybe not. Maybe it's not real blatant, but I mean the obvious one here in this is LaBeef's spurs. And no matter where we hear them, even if it's way down near Greaser Bob's, when we're way up on the cliff, we know who's there. Do you guys approach the film and the story kind of attaching sonic themes to different characters? Do you kind of look at it that way?
We absolutely do. It's inevitable, and it's you're kind of drawn to it in a way of helping define the characters. That the spur is a good example, but we do it in more depth. We have certainly I do it with the dialogue. I try to help define the quality of the voice, helps define the character often. And like for instance with Maddie, we tried to make her voice kind of younger, which wasn't a chore because she is young. But we tried to make it a little less bassy so that it was clear that she was a younger person. And there actually are a lot of jokes that we have done over the years which start off as jokes and end up becoming part of the movie. And one example, this is a good example because it was very direct, was in Barton Fink. When Barton opens the door to his room, we put in as a joke a whoosh sound, as if his room is actually a sealed chamber.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So when he opens the door, you hear this sort of thing. It's like letting the air out or in.
This is in Goodman, in John Goodman's room, right?
It's in Barton Fink's room. So whenever he opens the door to that room, you hear that air rush in. So his room is so much a vacuum that not even words can escape that room. So we had the Foley stage that we worked in had because of the way the air conditioning was and the room itself was isolated. When you open the door to the room, you would get that sound. So I recorded that sound, and I put it in the film as a joke. Right? So the very first time he opens the door to his room, you hear that sound, and then, the next time he opened the door, it wasn't there. And Ethan's like, "Hey, where's the whoosh? We got to have my whoosh here." So we put it in everywhere. So then it became a joke that became part of the character of the movie. A subtle one. But
And is there something specific in True Grit that you can point to?
I think these spurs are the one.
Yeah.
We use those spurs because those are the sound, we actually got the prop because there were some production sounds, and rather than replace them all, we just got the actual prop and we used that to make the Foley for the rest of the movie, for all the other scenes in the film.
And his match strikes too, because that's also one of the things that wakes up Maddie in the morning after LaBeef's first reveal on the porch.
His match
his
strikes
team.
seem to be far more dramatic than Rooster's. It's kind of like
He's
it's like
trying
LaBeef
harder.
has to announce
He does.
himself whenever he shows up.
Yes.
Well, he's a Texas Ranger.
What about you, Greg? Is there a particular moment or a shot or sequence or
God,
in the film that
so
Maybe
So
something
many.
subtle, something that we'd be surprised.
I love just the little small things when they're cooking up the softie and before before the guys in the cabin get murdered. There's a little hinge squeak that I just love. I just love the
On
detail.
the little Dutch oven. That's
Yes,
kind
exactly.
Of, over
Swinging back and forth.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Skip?
Well, I
you
like,
have a
I
favorite
do like
scene?
the courtroom scene, even though I don't like courtroom scenes. I liked that scene. I love the way Jeff Bridges played that part, and I particularly like the way they shot the scene because, and this is a little trick that we tried, which some people may get, I don't know, where we're starting with Maddie and we're going to him. So we're all, as an audience, and the way the film is shot, we're starting outside and we're going into the room, and then we're gradually creeping, as she does. She creeps to the head of the audience so she can see what's going on, and we go with her. And the beginning, as is traditional, we're quite wide, and we see the whole situation, and we see there's Rooster over there. And as she gets closer, the coverage gets closer. And then there's a certain point where we have the kind of discourse between the judge and the lawyers and the defendant, and then the defense attorney comes into the scene, the
prosecutor.
The prosecutor comes into the scene, right? And he says he's got a very specific story that he wants to tell. And then the camera starts going closer and closer on Rooster. So we've gone up to the point of sort of the reality of the room, and now we go beyond that point, and the camera pushes in on Rooster. So we started off having a fairly echoey, kind of a big wooden sort of church sort of sound, a big hall. So it's quite a realistic sort of sound for everyone. Everyone's voice is fairly, reverberant and nice and kind of a warm, natural sound. And then when we get to that point where we push forward and break through and become really like close-ups on Rooster now, and there's a lot of things being said now. He's being accused of murder by the attorney. I went further. We just kept making it louder and more reverberant, and now he's really like a preacher in a church. So he's really like preaching. It was a trick, and I tried it, and it worked. And for me, it worked, and for Joel and Ethan, they liked the idea of it going farther. And I'm not sure anyone gets that, but
I
thought
think
that
we
was a
feel it
fun-
emotionally, but we could never explain, what's actually happening technically. That the voice is taking on a louder quality, a different tonal quality.
It was a good experiment. It was really enjoyable, and I particularly like that I got past my courtroom issues,
Fear of courtroom drama.
fear of courtroom drama.
Toughest challenge on the film? I mean, we've talked about a lot of them. We've talked about the dialogue and the weather and things like that, but
Toughest challenge for me was the back room scene, because there was
in the back of the
in the
grocery room.
back of the grocery room. Because we looped Jeff Bridges twice. He came in for 2 days early on, and he came in for a half a day later, and he was just fantastic. I was like, when we first talked about doing all this ADR and doing this very specific, for intelligibility issues, my first thought was like, this is never going to work.
There's a big range of actors' ability to do looping,
Right,
and
exactly.
to get back
To get
into
back into
that
the-
emotional moment in the performance,
Right, to
and
be
able
that
to
guy
recreate
again.
it.
You got to be that guy again, and he could just turn it on, and he was just such a sweet guy and worked so hard. And but it was just how good he was. I remember we looped the last line in the scene is him laying there, and he says, meet me here at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'll go on our coon hunt. That's looped in the movie, and he looped it the first time, and then he came back the second time, and he just looped meet me, like 2 months later, to make that better.
So we could hear the meat.
So we could hear the meat.
Wow,
That's what we were
that's
doing,
incredible.
is looping to make individual parts of sentences clear. some things were half production, half ADR, and it really worked better than I was like, this is not how you do things, as far as like, you have to loop a sequence for it to match. But when he came in and started doing it, she was so fantastic.
Well, Greg, I imagine your experience working on the Coen brothers movies, these last number of films, has changed a lot, because you guys have really altered your workflow, haven't you?
We have, yeah. This is my 7th film with Skip and the Coen brothers, who are just about the best filmmakers anyone could ever hope to work with and for. And yes, it has. I mean, the workflow has changed. The Skip and Craig and Byron, coming on way early. I'm kind of in later, just during the final process, and so it's great. They've had a chance to kind of take shape and form with Joel and Ethan, and then I come in at the end, kind of just about clean up but it's good. I actually, the process makes sense for them as filmmakers, and I think the film also.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for sitting down and talking to us. I know the conversation kind of went all over the place, but there's a lot really involved, even in a picture that seems as minimalistic as this one, where we think it's only got a few typical Western sounds. It goes much deeper than that, and I particularly enjoyed hearing about how you guys, along with Joel and Ethan, use sound to create and define character and set us in a particular time and place and establish point of view as well. So, guys, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Nice job.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Bruce.
guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
And
Brother.
you, brother.
All right.